Begin to look at looking for helpers for Mr. Rodgers' neighborhood. Our Old Testament reading comes from 1 Chronicles in the 12th chapter and just verses 16, 17, and 18. I'd like you to hear God's word for us this morning. Other Benjamites and some men from Judah also came to David in his stronghold. David went out to meet them and said to them, "If you have come to me in peace to help me, I am ready for you to join me. But if you have come to betray me to my enemies when my hands are free from violence, may the God of our ancestors see it and judge you." Then the Spirit came on Amasai, chief of the 30, and he said, "We are yours, David. We are with you, son of Jesse. Success to you and success to those who help you, for your God will help you." So David received them and made them leaders of his raiding bands. And then we hear the words from the psalmist in Psalm 121, and we've heard some of these words in our responsive call to worship, but hear this psalm in its entirety. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. The Lord will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. And then our New Testament reading comes from the letter to the Hebrews, from the 13th chapter, and we'll read verses 1 through 3 and then skip down to 6 through 8. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Continue to remember those in the prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. And then jumping down to verse 6. So we say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" Remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. This is God's holy word for us this day. As we begin to look at Mr. Rodgers this morning, from his book, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, which is a book full of his poetry. You may remember that he has written many poems and over 200 songs, many of his poems put to music on his show. But as we look today at this concept of helpers, I just want to read to you a poem that he did put to music, but I'm just going to read you the poem. What do you do with the mad that you feel? What do you do with the mad that you feel when you feel so mad you could bite? When the whole wide world seems oh so wrong and nothing you do seems very right? What do you do? Do you punch a bag? Do you pound some clay or some dough? Do you round up friends for a game of tag or see how fast you go? It's great to be able to stop when you've planned a thing that's wrong and be able to do something else instead and think this song. I can stop when I want to, can stop when I wish. I can stop anytime. And what a good feeling to feel like this. and to know that the feeling is really mine. Know that there's something deep inside that helps us become what we can. For a girl can be someday a woman, and a boy can someday a man. Fred Rodgers, known as a pastor, author, puppeteer, talented musician, songwriter, poet, father and husband, and the brains and face behind Mr. Rodgers' Neighborhood. But Fred Rodgers was also a child psychologist in many ways, a civil rights activist, an advocate for children's television, and someone who believed that children needed to understand the hard stuff and be listened to and talked to about their feelings when bad things happened, particularly in our world. Some of that might have come from his own childhood. His grandfather, Frederick, had instilled values of endless empathy, admirable patience, and loving acceptance for those around him, regardless of creed or background, and his grandson and namesake. While the other adults around Fred sympathized with his social awkwardness and encouraged him to conform to the norms so that nobody would bother him, his grandfather accepted him just as he was and told him to be who he was created to be. The emotional young man who was bullied often in school and even in the neighborhood struggled, for he wished not to change his ways. Instead, he longed for someone to tell him that it was okay to feel that way, that it was okay to feel bad about what happened, and even to feel sad. When I was a boy, Fred said later in life, I used to think that strong meant having big muscles, great physical power. But the longer I live, the more I realize that real strength has much more to do with what is not seen. Real strength has to do with helping others. While Fred's mother, Nancy Rodgers, kept him, his sister, and older brother well protected, she did so out of a place of love. She loved her children equally, made an effort to attend all school events, and did her best to cheer up her children with jokes, happy stories, or by singing songs. Her thoughtfulness was paired with an ability to locate silver linings in the largest clouds, a trait she had inherited from her own father. Whenever Fred became disillusioned or upset by the news of war, conflict, or other harsh realities on the radio and television, his mother placed a consoling hand on his shoulder and gave it a tight squeeze. Look for the helpers, she reminded him. He took that message to heart and reinforced that message with his television viewers often as he walked them through the hard stuff of life. When I was a boy and would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. To this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I am always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in this world. That quote is also on the front of your bulletin this morning. Once, Mr. Rodgers was being interviewed about how to calm children who had been upset by overhearing the news as the Iraq War was breaking out. After answering questions from the interviewer, he mentioned that even reporters can become upset by the scary news they report. He took the opportunity to offer care and comfort to the news person who clearly didn't know how to respond to being treated like an actual human being. The casual yet intimate, friendly atmosphere provided by the television episodes from the Children's Corner all the way through to Mr. Rodgers' neighborhood allowed Fred Rodgers a platform to touch upon hard-hitting subject matters, not by diluting them with cute songs and puppets, but by carefully deconstructing them or weaving serious topics into the storylines. Mr. Rodgers treated his guests, children and grown-up alike, with fatherly warmth and sincerity, but it was the respect he showed towards his neighbors, no matter their age, color, or size, that resonated with the youngest viewers. Mr. Rodgers was honest. He talked to children about real things in their lives. He talked about death, divorce, birth, feelings, many things that we tend not to talk to with our children. He would say, "Did you know it's okay to wonder?" Mr. Rodgers was like a curious child, and he shared that wonder and curiosity with the children in his audience. Picture would show videos right in his living room of how things were made, like peanut butter, bouncing balls, musical instruments, even visiting a crayon factory. Once he showed a cat having kittens and walked the kids through the amazing process of a video. He was willing to talk about uncomfortable subjects and chose to tackle current events such as the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy in the hopes of helping children better understand these sensitive issues. It was in the first year of the show, and as the news coverage of the assassination was everywhere, in the neighborhood of make-believe, Daniel Striped Tiger asked Lady Aberline, "What does assassination mean?" She answers truthfully and says that there's been a lot of talk about assassination today, hasn't there? Daniel replies, "Yes, and I'd rather talk about it another day." To which Lady Aberline says, "That's okay too." Confronting our feelings and giving them appropriate expression always takes strength, not weakness. It takes strength to acknowledge our anger and sometimes more strength, yet to curb the aggressive urges anger may bring, and to channel them into non-violent outlets. It takes strength to face our sadness and to grieve and to let our grief and our anger flow in tears when they need to. It takes strength to talk about our feelings and to reach out for help and comfort when we need it, Fred Rodgers said. Neither Fred nor his wife, Joanne, had been allowed to share their anger as children. So he used Daniel Striped Tiger to express how to share true feelings, fears, anxieties that kids have. It was easier for the puppets to say, "I'm really scared." And even easier for kids to talk to the puppet about their feelings, even while the puppet was right there on Fred Rodgers' hand, sitting right next to them. I felt like I had to talk to the families about loss, Fred said. Children have deep feelings just like adults. We need to understand them and respond to those feelings and listen. He encouraged his viewers to express their emotions in a healthy way. It's understandable that we and our children find many things hard to talk about, he said. But anything that's human is mentionable. And anything that's mentionable can be more manageable. Don't you often find that just having a good listener makes your upsetting times more manageable? When we can talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we're not alone and that our feelings are natural and normal. Fred Rodgers, in the first year of the show, took on the events of the world. The neighborhood of make-believe had conflict just like the world. It was not a fantasy world at all. Parallels existed often between the real world and the neighborhood. And in 1968, the world was at war, and King Friday the 13th builds a wall to protect the kingdom from change. Conversation opens up on peace and messages of peace, and kindness float with the balloons into the kingdom from the rest of the neighborhood, and the wall comes down. In times of stress, the best thing we can do for our children and for each other is to listen with our ears and our hearts, and to be assured that our questions are just as important as our answers. We speak with more than our mouths. We listen with more than our ears. Mr. Rodgers also spoke to the national tragedy of the Challenger explosion. After weeks of hearing the reports from teacher Krista McCullough about her upcoming adventure in space. You might remember it was in every classroom. And many classrooms were gathered to watch the liftoff and to watch the tragedy unfold. Sometimes we need to struggle with tragedy to feel the gravity of love. Love keeps us together and afloat, he shared. The unusually diverse community within Mr. Rodgers' neighborhood was designed to expose his audience to the rainbow of races, cultures, and lifestyles, often neglected in the media. The year the program premiered nationwide in 1968, racial tensions were at their peak in the United States, aggravated by the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in early April. Fred's decision to feature Mrs. Saunders, an African-American teacher, along with a small class of interracial students, was no coincidence. In August of 1968, Officer Clemens, the neighborhood policeman, was introduced. Not only were audiences introduced to an African-American man in uniform, a figure of authority and security, Officer Clemens became the first reoccurring African-American character on a children's television program. Clemens himself was hesitant at first. Police were the scariest people in the neighborhood, and especially to those of color. But Fred Rodgers was a civil rights activist at heart. Officer Clemens, played by actor Francois Clemens, was a positive role model of the police in a time of turbulence. In a segment shown in 1969, Mr. Rodgers took his agenda one step further with an episode where he takes a plastic kiddie pool out into the yard on a hot day, puts his feet in and sprays them with cold water. When he spots Officer Clemens, he invites him to join him in cooling off by rolling up his pant legs and sticking his feet in the kiddie pool. The image was simple enough. but the symbolism of a black man and a white man sharing a quick dip in the pool at a time when almost all facilities were segregated carried with it an impactful message. Clemens explained, "The icon Fred Rodgers not only was showing my brown skin in the pool with his white skin as two friends, but as I was getting out of that pool, he was helping me dry my feet with the same towel." Fred Rodgers also made a point to feature strong female characters with respectable careers, typically reserved for men in that day and age. In one 1975 episode, aired 2 years after Compton Mayor Doris A. Davis made history as the first female African-American mayor, Mayor Maggie, played by black actress Maggie Stewart, was introduced in the neighborhood of Make-Believe as King Friday the 13th's equal. To children watching the show, that is what the world should look like, because it happened in the neighborhood. In one of the last episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in 1993, Officer Clemens stops by once again to share the cool water of the kiddie pool with Mr. Rogers. A different era entirely. The episode ends with the trademark final words. "You make every day a special day just by being you, and I like you just the way you are." But this time, he was looking straight into Clemens' misty eyes. After the show was taped, Clemens asked him, "Fred, were you talking to me?" Fred replied, "Yes, I have been talking to you for years, but you heard me today." There's no should or should not when it comes to having feelings. They're part of who we are, and their origins are beyond our control. When we can believe that may I find it easier to make constructive choices about what we do with those feelings. We learn to manage those feelings. Fred Rodgers wasn't completely done yet as the television show took a break and went into repeats. In 1976, that break happened. In that repeat, rerun season, he authored 35 books, produced a number of documentaries, such as Mr. Rogers' Heroes and Old Friends, New Friends. But this last one was for adults. He found that there was not as good as a connection as he had with children, however. So following several incidences and accidents while with children tying towels around their necks and jumping off things like Superman, several with serious injuries and one even death, Mr. Rogers started a new show. In 1980, About Heroes in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was featured. Soon came others in the series, about divorce, about death, and others. Finally, on August 31st, 2001, after 31 seasons, 865 episodes, and the production of over 200 original songs, America's favorite neighbor hung up his coat, slipped on his sweater and sneakers, and welcomed children into his home for the last time. But Fred Rodgers was not entirely done with television in his short retirement. There were adult public service announcements that he was asked to make regarding national tragedies and disasters. Following the horrors of September 11th, Fred Rodgers was asked to speak in one such PSA. People listen to you. So sitting at the piano with the neighborhood of make-believe scene behind him, he said, "No matter our particular job, especially in the world today, we are all created to be repairers of creation. Thank you for whatever you do and wherever you are to bring joy, life, hope, and faith, pardon and love to your neighbors and to yourself." Reverend Fred Rodgers didn't wear a cleric collar, a robe, or even a stole. He wore a sweater. He didn't deliver a sermon, but a communication of the heart. His theology was, love your neighbor, love yourself. Without a single quote from the Bible, he preached the gospel. On television, I dare to say what I say and do what I do because I know that somehow those words and deeds will be translated into what's needed for whoever hears and sees. Love and trust in the space between what's said and what's heard in our life can make all the difference in this world. He understood that children have feelings, fears, and anxieties just like adults, and sometimes even stronger. All of us at some time or other need help, he said. Whether we're giving or receiving help, each one of us has something valuable to bring to this world. That's one of the things that connects us as neighbors. In our own way, each one of us is a giver and a receiver. I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. The Lord will keep you from all harm. God will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. May it always be so.